the offensive side, just your impressions of Jalen and the Eagles so far getting out to that 3-0 start.
I think they're the most talented team in the NFC. And I think they got a real nice blend of youth and then also experience, and I think that's what you need.
I'd rather go to an NFL football team that has great players on it than be stuck on a football team like I was with the Bucs that had a bunch of shitty guys that were getting drilled. Because you know what? When you go to the NFL, you got to learn from previous pros. You know, my best time I learned was when I was with Ed Jones. Because you know why? All those guys got into a rhythm. They showed you get into a routine. A guy that I'm going to bring on here, longtime NFL guy, knows that as well as anybody. And when you had a train wreck like you had last year with Urban Meyer, and you bring a pro in like Doug Pederson, he's going to teach people that you get into a routine because Doug's a former player. Let's bring Jeff Lageman in now, former NFLer, part of the broadcast team for the Jags. And thanks so much for doing this, brother. I appreciate you stepping in, man.
Yeah, no problem, Dan. Good to be on with you.
You know, tell me this team here and give me your assessment. We always say this, right, Jeff? 3 games is a trend for NFL players, 3 years for you to get an evaluation on a player. It's 3 games in now. What are you seeing so far with this football team?
Well, I think what you mentioned is the impact of Doug Pederson and a coaching staff that really is just outstanding and just vastly different from last year. And I think it's really focused a football team. They've added a tremendous amount of personnel. They've increased the veteran presence around Trevor Lawrence, a young player that is clearly ascending, and it's making a big impact. And I think that's the thing that's been most impressive is that the messaging that Doug Pederson has brought to this organization and a steadfast approach. And that's really what this organization needed. And I think as part of him bringing that in, they also brought in numerous guys that I think I consider like total pros. You know, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Foye Oluokun, Fadakasi, Brandon Sheriff. I mean, these guys are guys that wore with the C on the chest, high-quality guys, high competitors, and total pros. And that's what you got to have to change a culture because the Jaguars needed a culture change.
To me, it looks like stability, and it looks like Tom Coughlin stuff, Jeff, you know, where accountability, like you said, adults in the building here. You know, that thing a year ago was a train wreck. And I don't mean to say this to you, but I never thought it was going to last a year either because I never really trusted the guy. And I think that's what Doug brings to the table, isn't it? He brings accountability. And when a guy's been through it, seen it, done it, and won it, doesn't that resonate with the group? And what doesn't that resonate with the building?
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting, Doug's approach in the offseason, Dan, because he almost felt like that the team needed a period of healing, which is kind of odd. You know, I mean, you don't think of a team needs to heal from a previous regime, but that's kind of the approach that he took. And he felt that that was the only way to build trust going forward with him and his staff was to build that trust to allow the team to heal. And so it was impressive to watch, and it was certainly a much different approach than I'd ever heard of, but certainly last year was something I had never seen. So I could understand it in a lot of ways. But then once training camp started, it was time to get to work, and the approach was totally different, and he became a demanding coach, but not a guy that was a pain in the rear end kind of a head coach, but just a demanding, fair coach. And the players still consider him a player's coach, which is very rare. It's very rare to have a player's coach to be considered, demanding and tough at the same time. But certainly Doug is exactly that.
What is the one intangible you see so far that he's had an impression on with Trevor Lawrence? Because I'll tell you, Jeff, every time I turn on the television set and I watch Trevor Lawrence, from the Washington game to the Colts game and to the destruction of the Chargers, it looks to me like it's gradual going up the steps. He's getting better and better every week. What do you think that's attributed to?
Well, first and foremost, I think the belief in himself and the belief in the offense and a complete understanding of the offense. I think that's the most important thing that Doug has instilled in Trevor. Last year was a little bit of a lost year in some respects, but he still played the game, and it's hard to replace experience. And I think that was ultra important for Trevor to get under his belt. Now, this year in week one at Washington, Trevor didn't have a great game. You know, he missed some open guys that were for touchdowns, and it cost the team the victory. And then week two, all of a sudden, you got the Colts coming to town, and the approach was much different. It was more methodical, a little bit shorter. And I think it was very much planned on Doug's part just to get a lot of confidence instilled in his young quarterback, and it worked. And then against the Chargers, kind of a similar approach. Let's get some high percentage stuff, and then when we find an opportunity to take our shots, we'll take our shots. But interesting conversation I had with Doug last week, and it was last Thursday, and I asked him because, you know, he worked with Frank Reich in Philly, and many people believe that he was a really good offensive mind, and those two worked well together. And I asked him, I said, what's it like working with the staff that you have this year? Because, you know, you still have Press Taylor, but now you've got Mike McCoy, you've got Jim Bob Cooter, who has been an offensive coordinator in the past with the Detroit Lions, you know, and a lot of really good offensive coaches. So when you put all those minds together, I just wanted to know what it was like for him. And he said, you know, Jeff, he said, it's the best I've ever been around. And he said, from the standpoint of is that we don't all have, you know, I don't have a bunch of yes men, and they're just not all saying, okay, what you're doing is great. He goes, a lot of times we have differences of opinion. And he goes, and that differences of opinion, a lot of times is the only way that you can grow as a staff. And so that was really interesting to hear because, I mean, you're talking about a guy who went to a Super Bowl and won it. And he's talking about the staff that he's with now is the best that he's ever been around. That's pretty impressive.
You know, I got to give you a little insight here because I've been friends with Frank Reich for about 40 years. He recommended Mike McCoy be the quarterback coach down in Jacksonville. He worked together when they were in San Diego when the Chargers were still in town there, and even Nick Sirianni. So there's kind of a connection in there with Frank, and you got Sirianni because he recommended Sirianni to Philly, and Frank recommended that Mike McCoy, who I know very well, as the quarterback coach. And all those guys, former players, worked with guys like Phillip Rivers. I mean, I see a little bit of the game of Phillip Rivers and what I'm seeing a little bit here with Trevor Lawrence. So you think this could be one of the best coaching staffs they've had down there since maybe Coach Coughlin?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And defensively, look, you got a first-time defensive coordinator, Mike Caldwell, but I give Doug Pederson credit. He kept Bob Sutton on as a senior defensive assistant, and that's what you want when you got a first-time defensive coordinator such as Mike Caldwell, to have somebody who's got some experience that he can kind of bend his ear when he has to. And then defensive staff-wise and offensive staff-wise, you got guys that have been around the league for a while. You know, last year you had a lot of newbies, a kind of a mix of guys that have been around the league and some college guys, but you know, this is an NFL staff, and it's got a lot of experience from a playing standpoint and also from a coaching standpoint. And, you know, it's a joy to be around because, I mean, just for me, you know, doing what I do, and Dan, you know how that works, you know, and when you're working with guys that kind of know what the drill is, man, it makes life a lot funner.
Absolutely, man. Hey, the addition of NTN, you know, the other back, Robinson, if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean,
that's right.
Boy, I'll tell you, you talk about a guy who gets lost in the shuffle on who's really a great and productive back. That kid Robinson can play, man. And now you add this versatility with this kid who can catch the ball out of the backfield. I mean, pretty good-looking dynamic duo there so far. And really, future's really promising for those two guys.
Well, and we really, at the beginning of the year, when I say we, everybody that's watching them, we really didn't know what to expect because James is coming back from an Achilles injury where he tore his Achilles completely in week 16 last year. And so he had to have that surgically repaired. Travis Etienne had a Liz Frank last year that required surgery and a screw put in his foot. So when you've got two running backs coming back with foot injuries, you know, look, last time I checked, when you've got a race car, the wheels are pretty important, right? You know, and for running backs, you know, your feet are very important, and Achilles as well. And so we were kind of like, okay, you know, wait and see. But James Robinson has had tremendous rehab, and the Jaguars medical team does a great job with rehab. And he has come back and really shown no ill effects. I mean, he had a 50-yard touchdown run the other day on a 4th and 1, and nobody caught him from behind. And so you combine the every down capabilities of James Robinson, because he truly is an every down back, with a guy like Etienne that has a little different skill set. You know, he's probably a little bit faster, but then also he catches the ball out of the backfield and he's more of a space player. You know, so these two guys, I think, complement each other very well. And And I think we're only starting to see the tip of the iceberg with ETN, because I think there's so much more to see. And every time he touches the ball, because he's got that speed, he's one of those guys that just kind of, you hold your breath for a minute.
Couple last questions for you here, Jeff. Boy, I'll tell you something. That kid Walker and that kid Lloyd, they can play, man. That kid Lloyd is all over the field. He scrapes the lane. I mean, I talked to Kyle Whittingham about him. He goes, man, you're not going to see a harder worker and you're not going to see a harder hitter. This kid can play. Both those guys are making impact football plays on your team, especially in the last 2 weeks. I mean, just your impression so far.
Well, I'll start with Trayvon Walker. I mean, he's a 6'6", 272-pound outside linebacker that can drop in coverage and rush the passer. And, oh, by the way, he's arguably the most violent tackler I've ever seen. He had a hit this past week on Austin Eckler that I didn't know Eckler was going to get up. I mean, it was just holy cow. And he's really good against the run. He's still developing as a pass rusher, but he's still an effective pass rusher. But I think he's still got a lot to learn there. So when he does learn, it's going to be scary. Now, Devin Lloyd, the interesting thing about him, he was hurt the entirety of camp. He popped a hamstring doing his conditioning test when he came in. So he did not have the benefit of training camp. So the last week of training camp, he ended up practicing that week, played against the Falcons in a meaningless last preseason game. And then in week 1, he started. So he essentially had about 3 to 4 weeks to get ready for being a starter in the NFL. And he's been simply fantastic. He's one of those change the culture guys. He is a student of the game. Mike Caldwell says it. And he's got the athleticism, the speed, the gift. And most importantly, when he steps in front of the huddle, at some point, he will be doing that. Oluokun is doing it right now. But when he steps in front of the huddle, that's the guy that you want leading your defense, because he is a natural-born leader. And let me just add this. All these people that we're talking about, Doug Pederson and Trent Baalke, give them credit. They brought in guys that could change the culture, guys that could change the way they play the game. And when you're trying to take a huge undertaking and changing a franchise's direction, because the simple fact is the Jaguars have been one of the most losing franchises in the last decade. When you're trying to change that, you got to get the right people. And I give them credit. They made no bones about the type of person that they were going to go after, and they did a great job of it in free agency and also with the draft.
Finally here, your preparation for this Sunday's game against the Eagles. I mean, I would have to think that, just by some of the culture things that you were talking about in Jacksonville, you're probably seeing a little bit of what that was. I know it's a different coaching staff there, but a lot of the players from that 17 Super Bowl are still in the building there. Just so far, what you've seen, Jeff, with what the Eagles have accomplished with all the new additions on defense, especially A.J. Brown over on the offensive side, just your impressions of Jalen and the Eagles so far getting out to that 3-0 start.
I think they're the most talented team in the NFC. And I think they got a real nice blend of youth and then also experience. And I think that's what you need. And I really am impressed with Jalen Hurts, a guy that many people didn't believe could be a franchise quarterback, but all he's doing is showing that he is. And boy, what a luxury for Howie Roseman going forward, because now you got a guy, first off, you're not going to have to pay him a ton of money right now, but you're also not going to have to use draft picks and draft capital to find a franchise quarterback. And you don't know if you're going to get one even still when you draft one, so they're in a real good position. And I like what Nick Sirianni is doing offensively. Yeah, sorry about that, but I think it's going to be a challenge this week, Dan, because right now we're under a hurricane watch and tropical storm warning down here. So the preparation this week is going to be far from normal for this football team, and it's definitely far from normal for me. I've been out moving chairs off the patio, so we're going to have to kind of see where that leads us, and
you think you'll come up to Philly? You think you'll come up to Philly sooner if the storm keeps going?
I think everything is on the table right now. And right now the storm track is looking like it's going to enter somewhere down around Naples area and then cross the state. And right now it has it kind of tracking right over Jacksonville. But at this point, everything's a little bit fluid. So I think everything's on the table from a preparation standpoint. And so, it's kind of one of those things you check your phone every 30 minutes because you don't know what's going to happen.
Well, be safe there, you and your family, Jeff. We've known each other a long time, and all the great folks in Jacksonville. And it should be a remarkable game. And to see Doug Pederson walk through that tunnel again And to see the reception, I know the Eagle fans are going to give him some cheers, and I know that there's going to be a tribute to him too. So I think it's going to be an interesting ball game on Sunday.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great football game. I'm looking forward to it. And Dan, I appreciate you having me on.
You bet. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it, brother.
Dan.
You got it. That is Jeff Lageman, part of the broadcast team, longtime NFL guy, and we send our wishes out for him and his family to remain safe out there too, because now they're saying it's supposed to go from like Naples through Tampa, Sarasota, and then cut over into the Jacksonville area and then up the coast. So if it goes up the coast, it's going to stay close to shore because, that's how – do you know how many hurricanes Big Sills has been through? Hugo, Andrew, all of them, man, down there in South Florida. And they hug the coast because it's warm. That's why you don't see a lot of hurricanes in the Pacific, because it's a deeper ocean and you don't get any hurricanes coming into California because the water's too cold. So they may probably – I would say this, you probably come up. If I were Doug, I'd take that team up Thursday to Pennsylvania and get them ready for this thing here. All right. I am going to hit on week 4 of the NFL. Little bit of what Jeff said. Don't forget Merrill Reese also will be with us at 5:30 Eastern time. Also, don't forget our good friends at Morgan & Morgan, where the fee is free, meaning this. They don't get paid unless you do. If you're hurt or injured on the job, there's only one law firm for you that will protect you and your family. It is Morgan & Morgan. Hey, for the people is not a slogan. It is who they are. Last 30 years, they've collected over $13.5 billion for their clients, making sure that you get the fair compensation for you and your family. Call them at 800-512-1600. That's 800-512-1600. The consultation's free. The call is free. Okay? Hey, 800-512-1600. When you call Morgan & Morgan, do me a favor. Tell them Big Sil sent you.
I'm John Morgan of Morgan & Morgan. When you're hit from behind in a car crash, the insurance company may try to say, you can't possibly be hurt. It was only a few miles an hour. It's simply not true. You see, here's the thing. Getting hit at 10 miles per hour is like falling off of this. 15 miles per hour, like this. And only 25 miles per hour, this. Injured, dial pound law. There's only one Morgan & Morgan.